If you're listening to this, you should just park your chronological age at the door and almost never reference it again. In my case, I was born in February of 1954, but I wake up 27 every day. Actually, I'm working on 18. I just crushed a mountain bike ride this weekend. I thought, you know what, I think I'm going for 18. Because if you reference that more youthful age, then that becomes your bellwether, right? If I don't feel 27, then you don't say, well, but I'm good for my age. Yeah, but look at all the people I can still beat or whatever. That's just acquiescing to the aging process. It's like, no, damn it, I'm 27. What do I need to do to get back to 27? What do I need to do to get back to 18? And the questions are driving progress. And so don't ever think that you get married to an answer. Always be driven by the questions.
Dr. Gladden, welcome to the Augmented Life.
Hey, Michael, good to be here.
I'm excited to have you on, getting into the science of peak performance, and I've been a fan of your work, and your background spanning, let's say, curing people to then turning to unleashing potential, and like many of us. You producing and listening to the Augmented Life are specifically interested in setting new highs, let's say, but new meaningful highs, right? Like there's clearly an important distinction between personal, meaningful fulfillment of like your potential versus adding another thing to like the list of things to worry about and over optimize. So I thought I'd begin by just asking how you define human potential and how that definition has changed, especially as your role in people's lives has changed.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, as you know, I practiced interventional cardiology for 25 years, right? So I did a lot of things in that space and built a heart group and owned cath labs and co-founded a heart hospital and all those kinds of things. I think in those days, if you will, we were always on the cutting edge of what was happening in interventional cardiology. And I learned a lot of things there. One, I learned that we're not curing people. Two, I learned that we were understanding that we could always get a better result for someone if we had a higher level of understanding or a deeper level of precision in what we were doing. And so that kind of mindset is kind of carried forward to today. So, I made a transition in 2012. I stepped away from interventional cardiology. And the reason I did that was in my 50s, I got sick. I was, exhausted all the time, putting on weight, losing strength. When I would become stressed, I would go over a cliff of depression, and I was developing brain fog, right? So this is the optimum or the opposite of peak performance, if you will. And I'd always been athletic, right? I played soccer and basketball. I played a little soccer in college and things like that. I'd gotten into mountain biking, surfing. I grew up body surfing and sort of took up board surfing, things like that, right? So snowboarding, I got into that when I was 45. My son got me into that, and got into heli snowboarding and snowcat and things like that. So been sort of a high performer in that sense my whole life. Not an elite athlete, but someone that really loves to function at a high level. And so, here I am in my 50s, and all of a sudden I'm not able to keep up with my kids anymore. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, right? I can't believe that's happening. So I went in and got tested. And for me, I was told, all of your tests come back looking normal for your age. You're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant?
Right.
Right. And so that was so existential. And I think for your listeners, as they go through their own journey towards peak performance, they're going to hit some bumps in the road where they get similar information from traditional medicine. Right. And so the question is, well, what do you do? And so what I did was I rejected the statement. And I threw myself into a world I had no idea about, which was functional medicine, integrative medicine, age management medicine. And in 2.5 years, I'd cracked the code for myself in terms of what was going on. And I felt great again. I mean, I felt really great, like I was back. So I had subclinical hypothyroidism. I don't convert inactive thyroid to active thyroid in my brain through a DAO2 gene that I'm homozygously handicapped with. And so once I got on the right T3, T4 thyroid, if you will, the lights came back on. Testosterone was a big help to me with some DHEA. Lost 20 pounds of fat, 10 pounds of muscle, and the anxiety and depression were related to the fact I don't make certain neurotransmitters very efficiently. So getting on the right set of supplements and avoiding certain foods and things like that, all of a sudden the brain fog was gone. I could get stressed and not get depressed. And I also learned how to meditate. And and when I started feeling so good again, the first thing I did was to ask myself, "Gosh, I wonder how good I can be. How fit, how strong, how mentally sharp, how many years and decades can I carry this forward?" Right. So one of the things I learned in that journey was that the questions we ask um, are much more important than the answers we currently have. Right.
Right, right.
So for all the people listening to this, it's really super important that you not get married to your answers. Right. So what happens is, professionals, we get trained, we get coached, we get whatever, and we learn how to do stuff, right? And then we get married to a set of answers. But in this game of ongoing peak performance, what's so important is to never get married to the answer. And it's really important to identify what are your questions, right? Because your questions are where all innovation and all progress is really going to come from. So anyway, that was a key insight for me, and I have many many other insights to share with you as we go along. Um, but I'll pause there because that's such a big one. Um, yeah, and I'll just add one to it actually, and that is I never identify with my chronological age,
Nice.
right? And so if you're listening to this, you should just park your chronological age at the door and almost never reference it again. So in my case, I was born in February of 1954, but I wake up 27 every day, and um, actually I'm working on 18. I just crushed a mountain bike ride this weekend. I thought, you know what? I think I'm going for 18 because if you reference that your more youthful age, then that becomes your bellwether, right? If I don't feel 27, then you don't say, well, but I'm good for my age. Yeah, but look at all the people I can still beat or whatever. That's just acquiescing to the aging process. It's like, no, damn it, I'm 27. What do I need to do to get back to 27? What do I need to do to get back to 18? And these questions are driving progress. And so don't ever think that you get married to an answer. Always be driven by the questions. So,
Right. If I may, let's break this into two parts. There's uh there's a greater commitment to questions than answers. Um, but then there's a question of when you stop to accept the answer that you have. Like my wife, for instance, has gone through a very similar process where she saw a shift in not just her physical performance, but also increase in experiencing brain fog. Similarly, talks to the doctor about it, and the answer is essentially you should accept your age, right? Um, I think that one of the challenges that we face is 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 how to almost tune our intuition as to when to accept the answer or like push further, um, and how we set those pegs, like how we set our points of reference to either accept or try to go further. It's hard to know without like I guess success examples.
well, I think what you're asking is, are there times when you should say this is good enough? Right. So I think when it comes to accepting answers, right, and answers, the questions all generate answers, right? It's just important to understand that the answers all have a shelf life, right?
Right.
The questions are eternal. And so, you can ask yourself, how do I get to the Olympics, right? Okay, well, that's a question, and you work hard and you get to the Olympics, all right? But then the question, may be, how do I maintain a high level of performance for the next decade, right? The question changes, but it still empowers you. So, um, a lot of people will get to the Olympics. They'll either win or not win. At least they participated, and there's a big psychological letdown. I mean, look at Michael Phelps, right? All the depression, right, that happened to him after that, right? So if you get married to that answer that by winning those gold medals, that's my whole thing. You see, then there's nothing to hold you up. It's the questions that hold you up. So in your wife's case, I don't know the question she was asking. She was maybe trying to get back to a certain level of function or whatever it was. But nonetheless, I would put questions underneath it, because even when you reach that point, it's like, what's the next question that's driving me? Right. And so I think that's what's key.
Yes.
I'll just say one other thing, and that is if you're asking for an answer, be careful who you're asking, right? Because if you're asking a doctor, you know that they're already working inside of a constrained system, right? It's constrained by the payers. And so the only answers they can give you are what works inside the payer framework. And so what happens is, because they're in an authoritarian position, right? They went to school and did this and that. I'm asking them, right? They're up here, I'm down here, so to speak. When they say that you should just accept your age, then we're more inclined to accept that answer. But
Yes.
never accept an answer. You can certainly incorporate an answer into your own solution, but never accept it as a limiting factor.
Right. Right. I I've seen this as a startup creator. I have this general observation that approximately everyone thinks that they work hard. Um, but some people have experienced what work in an extraordinary lab and an extraordinary company is like. And and every single time, um, it's eye-opening. Like we all go through this transformation where we're like, oh, that's how you achieve greatness. I didn't even know that kind of work was possible. And if you never get exposed to that, then like your bubble is never popped. And so you can easily mistake what is utterly like essentially average work, right, mediocre work, as extraordinary, because you've actually not been exposed to where the high watermarks are.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I think it's also important never to really get comfortable in the group that you're in, right?
Yes.
I mean, we grow by leaving home and going to an environment, a college or whatever that stretches us, right? We leave that and go into another program, or we start a job in another city or whatever. All these things are stretching. I think you want to be continually putting yourself in environments that stretch you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And where you risk embarrassing yourself. Like I've I've started a new company that's outside of my original domain of expertise. And the hardest thing about it is what makes this startup harder than the last one is that my friends and people that I've earned the respect of can now see me flailing around while I'm literally an expert.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that
this
I
is a good point. Go ahead. No, it's a
it's
really
where the
good
growth
point.
happens, but it's psychologically difficult.
I'll tell you what, I think here's my take on it. um, we all learn skills, right? Let's just say that. We all learn skills. And what happens is we start to identify with those skills. In other words, our identity, our self identity comes from the competence that we have with those skills, right?
Mhm.
What's so important, however, to really make progress in life is to approach it with a child's mind, a 5-year-old mind, right? If you show up at work with a 5-year-old mind, oh, what can I learn today, right?
Mhm.
For a 5-year-old, there is no failure, right? If they see a scooter go by, it's like, "Oh, I wanna do that," and they jump on it, they can't do it. It's like, "Oh, yeah, I can't. Oh, figure it out. I figured it out. Oh, I figured it out. Look at me, I'm doing it," right? There is no failure. There's only learning, and so it's so important to move away from this identity with a skill set, right? Because it puts you in handcuffs, because now, oh my gosh, if I were to get on something and I couldn't do it, well, that would destroy my whole ego structure here, right? And your ego structure is not based on what you know how to do, it's based on your ability to learn something new, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I applaud you for going offline. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. um, the now speaking of career transitions, so now in your current life where you really are pursuing the this integrative medicine, but also like helping unlock human potential, are you yourself finding, are you the one identifying hidden potential in in your clients, your patients, and raising the bar? the bar of the people that you're working with?
I would say that we have a team here, so it's not all just me, but I'm certainly the pointy end of the stick when it comes to that sort of thing. And I think what we're doing is we're actually, in many cases, unlocking people's potential. Um, and the way that we go about that is to understand that the aging process is an exponential process, not a linear one, right? So there's many misconceptions about aging and longevity. The first is that we relate to it as a linear process. It's another year, another birthday. I don't feel that much different, right? Yeah, and if you ask yourself, if the audience asks themselves, the same question, what am I going to feel like? What am I going to be like in 20 years, right? What am I going to be like? It's almost impossible to imagine you're going to be any different than you currently are.
Right. Yeah.
So, and yet when we look around us, we know that everybody between 70 and 80, 80 and 90 ages so much more quickly than people between 20 and 30, 30 and 40, right? So it's an exponential game we're playing. And so we mischaracterize the game, right? We see it all around us, but we don't really respond to it. So if you don't understand that you're playing an exponential game, then you'll end up with a linear strategy, right?
Right. Right.
And so you end up with a linear strategy. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to get a Fitbit. I'm going to learn how to meditate, try to lower my stress level, get my hormones checked. Great. Wonderful. Can't get there without it. It's a linear strategy to an exponential problem because everybody that ever did that still got old and died.
Yeah. Right.
Right? They all
Yes.
got old and died. So you need an exponential strategy. So in our world, what we've done is to create, and the book 100 is the New 30, it's really outlining the exponential strategy of how you actually go about this. The other misconception about longevity and even peak performance is, what's the point? So I firmly believe, and we'll talk about other things here, but I firmly believe that aging will be cracked in the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah. With the advent of AI, quantum computing, all the things that are happening and stuff we're working on and all this. I mean, I think I think aging will literally be cracked in the next 3 to 5 years. So let's say it is cracked. So let's say you're going to be 30 now for the rest of your life,
Right.
right? And you're going to live a long time, a long, 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 long time.
Mhm.
So now what? Right?
Right.
Right. So now what? Right. So now now you have to ask yourself big questions like what's the meaning of life? What's my purpose in life? Right. And what am I going to focus on to optimize?
Mhm.
And so this becomes super, super important stuff. It's part of having an exponential strategy is understanding why you're doing this. Like if you're trying to go to the Olympics, you're going there because you want to win a medal, right? But is that the only reason you're alive? Right? What happens when the Olympics are over? Right? See what I mean? So getting back to this much bigger sense of purpose. So in our world, the way we characterize that purpose is that when we're 100, we want to have a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind.
Nice. Oh, I like that.
Yeah. All the wisdom, all the insight, all the transcendence, all the perspective, all the love, right? That's where we want to be. And the opportunity for longevity is really the opportunity to elevate humanity and the experience of being human, right?
Right. Yes.
So that's really the goal. So it's a much bigger play. And when you think about that, oh my gosh, I get to do amazing things. Well, yeah, you want to live a long time. So imagine this, right? So aging is an exponential process of decline, right? And yet every decade of your life, you have exponentially more impact and more opportunity than you did before,
Right.
right? So when those two lines cross, that's like the tragedy of life, right? Right? Because now somebody that's gifted, talented, motivated, interested, asking the right questions, building things, creating things, learning new things, and sharing that knowledge with the world, they're cut down because their body, their biology can no longer support that. And then somebody comes to visit them in a nursing home, right? And so that's a tragedy of life. So if you have a body where you're 30 years old for a long, long time, well, then the exponential opportunity and impact continues to rise and rise and rise, right? So you have to understand that if you're going for longevity, if you're going for peak performance, you're going to be so far beyond anything that you ever imagined if you construct the questions properly, like how do I have that 30-year-old body so I can step into that 300/3000-year-old mind so I can have the best life any humans ever lived, right? That's what we're going for.
Mhm. I've set my own longevity goals based on roles that it's important to me to be able to fill,
Okay.
um, many decades hence. Like I want to be a good friend while my friends may be going through, some of the lowest periods of their lives. So how can I be available to them? How can I be both emotionally and, mentally available to them? How can I be a good uh, you know, parent and grandparent, possibly taking care of little ones. I need to actually have the energy to, be a responsible caretaker and a fun one. And I'm backing into the physical capabilities that I need in order to fulfill those roles. And one of the things that I found is that your body needs to support a helpful mind.
Yeah, yeah. You need the body. I mean, if the body fails, then you can have the best.
Doesn't matter what your intentions are.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are the working towards that? Let's say we all want to last until the singularity. Um, what should we be paying attention to now?
Yeah, and let me just comment for a second on on the the roles that you want to fill for a second.
Uh-huh.
So one of the things that I've done is I've done a lot of really deep meditations, and I've had some really profound meditative experiences where you get in touch directly with consciousness, source, God, and it's pure love. Oh my gosh, it is pure love, right?
Right. Right.
And what does love love to do? Apart from loving, it loves to love. But what else does it love to do? Well, it loves to create.
Yes.
And hence this unfolding, ever unfolding creative creation on top of creation universe that we reside in, multiverse, quite honestly. And then what's the feedback loop on that for joy? For love, rather, it's joy. So you have love creating joy. So what I do is I basically take that as the meaning of life and my purpose in life. So when I hear you talk about the roles that you have, your role really is to step into the lives of your grandchildren, right? Or your family or your friends. And from a loving place, create joy,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Right. From a
Okay.
loving place, create joy.
The let's talk meditation techniques for a minute. I've started meditating when I was very young. Um, in what I now know is the kind of classic Theravada tradition. So I was focusing on my breath. So I had a
Mhm.
focus object to my meditation, and this was a wonderful practice. It really helped me, for instance, manage the pain of cluster headaches, which was a major feature of
Yeah.
my life growing up. Relatively late in life, I I lost my skepticism of Vajrayana techniques and decided to learn some non-dual Vipassana to experience that open awareness, just literally looking at essentially the nature of consciousness.
Hmm.
Um, and um, I feel like it's miscommunicated in English. So you see a lot of the pursuit of emptiness, and that emptiness does not sound like there's going to be love there, right? Um, but this does seem like a universal experience. So therefore, I feel like maybe this is just very poorly translated in English. You see some people talking about vastness as opposed to emptiness, getting in touch with this open field of possibility, and then what do you feel compelled to fill it with? It is, love, kindness, and acts of creation.
Hmm.
So now I'm recently obsessed with how I can help my friends, anyone listening, to like speed run meditation. Right, it took me 35 years of doing this arguably the hard way.
Hmm.
um, what are the specific meditative practices that helped you get to, let's say, that place of loving kindness?
Yeah. The first meditation I learned was a very simple one about returning to breath. Right. So just taking your mind as it would wander and just return to focusing on your breath. Very, very simple, but yet profound. I found that I could start to actually have some control over my mind, right? I could bring it in and I could focus on my breath, and it was very relaxing, and it was just a very sort of sweet place to be, if you will, right?
Right. Mhm.
And then the next thing for me was I started reading Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now.
Fabulous. Mhm.
I'm sure everybody's read that. That's never meditated, but But I found that to be super helpful, not just because I wasn't reading it like I was reading to understand it. I was reading it to kind of feel it, right? What he was talking about, right?
Right.
So I would only read a sentence or two or a paragraph or maybe a page, just enough until I felt myself kind of tip back into that experience of being in a meditative state.
Right.
And it was in that, in one of those scenarios in the middle of the night when I woke up and I couldn't sleep, I went upstairs, and in my study, I had the book and I opened it up and I started reading. And it was probably 2 in the morning and my head rocked back. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I was just right there, and you know this, just right there. And there was a river of love basically flowing through everything. And across of it was consciousness, God, I don't know. But we were telepathically communicating, right?
Mhm.
And it was this profound sense of knowing and being known and loving and being loved, right? And and I just stayed in that experience. It was complete in and of itself. There was nothing to add. It was everything you ever wanted was like right there.
Right.
And when it was over, I realized, you know what, this is now my new definition of heaven,
Ah, nice.
right? And it's also now my new definition of what a great relationship is,
Ah, nice. Mhm.
to know and be known and to love and be loved, right? And so, meditations had a big impact on, my trajectory for how I frame other things up. And then I started, meditating in other ways too, in different circumstances. Once you learn to meditate, I explain to people it's a little bit like riding a bike,
Right.
right? If you
Yep.
if you know how to get into that state, I'm sure you and I could stop here and literally in about 3 seconds we could both be in a meditative state, right? Because it's like riding a bike. You just kind of take off on your bike, right?
Yeah.
But when you're trying to learn how to do it, it's like, oh, you're falling and you're tipping and whatever.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so there are products out there that can help coach the brain into these alpha wave states,
Right.
or even I think even more profound or deep theta states,
Yes.
right? The hypnagogic state. I've had really profound meditations there. But there are devices like Brain Tap, where you can actually dial in alpha or theta and just go. It basically entrain your brain to go into those states. And if you don't know how to meditate, getting some of those devices like that, I think there are other ones on the market. But I find that's if you want to cut back down on the 35 years, that's an easy way to sort of get started. And then if you do some reading, about some of this, I think Eckhart Tolle is a great source, or others. There are guided meditations. There's many apps now that you can use, things like that. But personally, I found that to be the direct drive, and I don't like somebody talking to me. I really just want
Uh-huh.
a little bit of sound or some
Right.
binaural beats, right, that kind of put you into a
Yes.
phased
Yes.
state. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I do it. Mhm.
After I learned to do Vipassana on um, thinking in images, I found I could cross from there to a hypnagogic state. And then from there, directly into REM like a lucid dreamer.
Nice.
Yeah, which is, yeah, it's super. I feel like this is like a stupid human trick, but it's super fun.
It's super cool. Yeah, that's awesome. It's really mind control is what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? And this is where people start to talk about. Oh, well, I was playing with this the other night, where I was actually watching myself transition from being awake actually into sleep, and then kind of being aware as I was asleep and being able to go back across, right? It it's kind of an interesting interface there. We've all had that interface, like we're awake and we don't really know when we fell asleep, but we just know we did fall asleep, right? But I could feel myself going across that line. It was like, oh, this is fascinating. So the point is you can start to control your mind and understand these things and move into these things, which is super helpful.
Yeah, I've heard from listeners of the Augmented Life because I didn't realize this is a subgenre of biohacking, but there is a subgenre of biohacking that is just playing around with lucid dreaming triggers to explore this boundary, which I think is just great.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you why I think it's so important is because when we learn how to meditate, when we develop a profound sense of unconditional love for ourselves, when we go back and we heal the traumas that we're living in reaction to, right, and actually transcend them and become grateful for them,
Right.
when we discover that feeling safe can never happen from something external to us, but is a psycho-spiritual question, right? When we develop great relationships, when we have wisdom, right? When we're spiritually connected, when we have a sense of purpose, when you kind of work through all those things, then what happens is the stress on the biology drops dramatically,
Right.
right? The
Right.
aging process, if you want to talk about a hack, like what, by dropping the stress in the system, you can really slow down the aging process. And so I think that's really the first hack. You can sit there and take buckets of supplements, but I don't think there's anything more powerful than actually, moving into this space of being calm, being loved, being creative, right? In this sort of place, right, where you have meaning and joy. Um, that's really the biggest step and the first step, right? Yes, there are many supplements you can take: alpha ketoglutarate, taurine, all the things we use, right? Urolithin A. I mean, we love all the stuff, but the point is, it's useless if you're sitting there in a massively stressed scenario.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. I'm realizing in real time a kind of connective theme of abundance where m- all throughout that many people cast adrift for how to find deep meaning, find value in scarcity, find value in rare things. Like obviously a lot of people who are also biohacker adjacent are like chasing exotic experiences. I'm going to
Mhm.
climb this mountain. I'm going to scuba dive the deepest, whatever it is. Um, and that all arises from the idea that the valuable things in life are the scarce things, or are the extra special things. But the psychologically, you can experience this sort of state of abundance where I think through meditation you learn to touch infinite love, and and then when you learn you can do that volitionally,
Right.
then you actually can have an attitude of abundance about right this far it, counterintuitively, at least I'll just speak for myself, this simply makes you more generous, right? That like if you know you can tap into that universal feeling, then it's not something you need to chase via drugs or a particular person saying just the right compliment to you or anything like that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. No, you don't need the external validation in that sense. And I think to your point, um, when people are chasing to go to Mount Everest or, get in a submarine, go in the Marianas Trench, I don't know, whatever people want to do. Um, I think part of it has to do with finding meaning, if you will.
Yeah, right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
And if I can do that, then it's giving me a sense of self-worth. It's giving me a sense of accomplishment, all these different things. But what does that actually do for you, right? Does that make you more lovable? Does that make you more at peace, right? And so to your point, I think the real thing that we're chasing is the things that we've talked about, right? Which is self-love, feeling safe, and being able to tap into an internal validation that doesn't require any external validation. That's when you've actually really latched onto something. Now you can go climb Everest because it's incredibly beautiful or it's whatever. Now it's a joyous experience, but your ego's not tied up. It doesn't need it for the validation kind of scenario, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think this means that it's extremely important thinking about a future um, of a long life. That you get started on a philosophical transformation right now.
That's right.
Because we're putting
100%.
our finger on the idea that we might in the future have an abundance of lifespan. We might in the future have an abundance of physical wealth as technology improves to the point where material scarcity becomes less and less.
Mhm.
Right. So these are obviously unalloyed good things, unless your theory of value is a theory of scarcity, in which case you're going to be cast adrift.
Yep, that's right. I think that's exactly right. That's why I've coupled this 300-year-old slash 3,000-year-old mind with the idea of longevity, because otherwise, you can really end up sideways. Like if your meaning in life is to be a breadwinner and you go to the office every day, and now all of a sudden somehow that's taken away because, AI is doing your job or whatever, right?
Right.
So
Right.
now who are you, right? Who are you now, right? And so that's why I like to move beyond even the roles that we want to fill into a deeper sense of who are we really and what's our value of being here and what's the purpose to be here. And love creating joy is always relevant, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's
Yes. Well
always
said.
relevant in every situation.
Right. Right. Well, okay. So how do we distinguish this? I feel like um, there's a distinction between longevity and, let's call it, vitality.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, you can hang on for a long time, or you can be vital for a long time. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. Coming back down to material reality, how do I self assess my vitality?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So, remember you're in an exponential game when it comes to your physical vitality. And it's impossible to win an exponential game if you don't know the cards you're holding.
Hmm.
It's also impossible to win that game if you don't know where you are in the game.
Right. Exactly.
So when you talk about assessments, we think it's critical that you actually understand your genetics and you do a deep dive on your genetics so you know where the icebergs are and you know where the life rafts are, right? So what are my assets, what are my liabilities, and how do I navigate, right? If you know those things, genetics, apart from things like sickle cell or Tay-Sachs or cystic fibrosis, I mean, where you have a diagnosis, right? But even those now with gene editing can be addressed, right? So that's exciting. But genetics in general are really a set of propensities or proclivities, if you will, right? And so, if you understand, like in my case, I understood that genetically I needed help with thyroid, and genetically I'm prone to depression and dementia if I don't take care of the neurotransmitter. But once I know those, it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. I can deal with it, right? So, if you're going to win this exponential health game, really critical to start with good genetic tests,
Uh-huh.
right? So, yeah. So we do a bunch of tests. It's no longer an issue of gene sequencing. That's easy, right? It's really about reporting. And certain companies will focus a lot more on reporting, like Intellex DNA does some really good uh, DNA reporting. New Amsterdam does complete genome sequencing out of Boston, things like that. There are other ones out there that can give you useful information. And the other thing is that you're just because you did the DNA company and it came down and told you that you're a poor estrogen metabolizer,
Mhm.
test your estrogen levels, right? Because they may be just fine, right? And so your genes, again, even though they're the cards you're holding, it doesn't necessarily tell you where you are in the game. So you have to then look at, where am I in the game? What are my hormone levels? What are my thyroids? What's my resting metabolic rate? Things like that. Do I have cancer? And I think cancer screening is done so poorly here, right? So we looking for circulating tumor cells as opposed to images
Yes.
on an MRI scan, right? And there's new tests coming where that will, this test Grail, which is really a travesty, quite honestly, um, is going to be replaced by something that's actually much more powerful very shortly. Yeah. So there's lots of things coming. Again, if you're asking the questions, how do you do this sort of thing? The other thing you have to know in the game is that you have to know where you stand relative to the hallmarks of aging, right? Which are actually the processes that are driving the current in the river, if you will, that's taking you towards the falls. Those are the exponential drivers, right? You're in an exponential game. Well, what are the main drivers? Well, there's things like, what are your telomere lengths? What's your stem cell function, mitochondrial function? What's your senescent cell burden? What's your area of inflammation, right? How are your DNA repair mechanisms working, right? If you're not looking at things at that level, and you're only looking at, well, what's my VO2 max and what's my muscle mass, I mean, you're completely missing the boat. Those are very, very important, and we look at all those in the health circle. So we really have five circles: life energy, where we're looking at psychospiritual; longevity, where we're looking at those drivers of aging; then health, right, which is super important, and then performance, right? How do you stay fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, great cardiovascular capacity, reserve, recovery, and flexibility, right? So if I want to be that at 100, I need to be that now. And then the fifth circle is, how do you optimize your environments to support the mission: home, work, business, travel, and vacation? So when you put all that together and you start to do testing and then take action and then do feedback loops of testing the wearables and things, we think that this is a much better exponential strategy. And we're not married to it in the sense that we're married to the idea of having an exponential strategy, but we're always asking, okay, how do we improve the model, right? So, but right now, it's a very, very sturdy model. So, yeah, we like it a lot.
All right. Now, if so, I tend to think in stacks because I'm a tech guy. Um, so yeah, so I'm getting my baseline DNA sequenced, with good reporting and investigative abilities. Uh, so, obviously companies like Grail are employing methylation for the purpose of something very specific in early detection of cancer. But let me go back to just methylation in general. Are you happy with the state of methylation tests? Like, do you think this is providing an important signal, or
It's providing a signal. It's jumped around a lot in the years. We've been using DNA methylation for probably 5 years now.
huh?
We found that you can do DNA methylation not only in the blood but in the urine. We've actually picked up bladder cancers there.
Whoa!
Yeah, if the DNA methylation age in the urine is very elevated, like let's say you're 52 and it comes back 96, that's been 100% hit for bladder cancer, actually,
Wow.
for us,
Okay.
right? So you have to know what you're testing and what it can tell you. But then DNA methylation in the blood can be super helpful, right? You can look at rates of aging, right? The Dunan pace, and you can look at omic ages where you're getting breakdowns on different, symphony age, if you will, different organ systems and things like that. So what's important to understand with medicine is that every test is a lens. And in humans, we have eyes with one lens and we see clearly, right? But a fly has many lenses and has a compound eye. And in medicine, you need a compound eye to really know what's going
Oh, I
on.
like that.
So
Yeah.
you've got to look at things through multiple lenses. So you can look at, yes, I can look at my liver through a regular tests, through an MRI scan, through a DNA methylation age, through a functional test, right? All these things. But when you look at it through multiple lenses, then you actually start to see what's actually going on.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, there's a lens question I want to ask you. Um, the but first to recap. So I'm getting my DNA. There is a place for methylation tests. Then I want to actually look at blood tests to get like what are my real hormone levels relative to what the DNA says it's going to be. Then there's a sort of temporal lens. Like, I imagine that some tests are fine point in time, but then sometimes it's like you wanna get the second or third derivative, like you wanna actually see what the rate of change is.
Oh, absolutely.
What are the tests that get better at by being repeated?
Well, I'll just add another category, and that's biometric tests,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So biometric tests are where you're actually measuring function.
Oh, right. Oh, yes, of course, right, yeah, like, with my wearables and things.
Right. What is your resting metabolic rate? What is your VO2 max? What is your bone density? Things like that. So you want to add that into it as well. And then of course gut health and things like that. So all that's important. But what you want to do is you want to know that, um, at least for now anyway, time is something we deal with, and so many of the tests will change over time. Right now, your genetics are going to be pretty much the same. The two genetic tests that I mentioned, the Intellex, and I'm not related to these companies, but Intellex and the New Amsterdam tests, I have no interest in either of these companies. But what's nice about them is that they have evergreen reporting. In other words, they're always updating the reports
Ah,
based on new
yes.
information, right? So that's nice on the genetic side. The other those aren't changing necessarily, right? Unless some new information comes. But with all the other tests, whether it's lab test or biometric testing, that stuff's changing over time. And so just because you had your stuff tested doesn't mean it might not need to be tested again, depending on your situation in 3 months, 6 months, a year, or 2 years, or something like that. So I think that's super important to understand. And I think the other thing is it's the quality of testing. Like, for example, um, everybody knows that insulin resistance and diabetes is a big issue, right? And so what do people test? Well, they test the fasting blood sugar and a hemoglobin A1C, right?
Mhm.
Well, how accurate is that for actually detecting insulin resistance? Well, it's not terribly accurate, right? Because we do that. We also do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test with an insulin curve on everybody, and we see people that have perfect hemoglobin A1Cs of 5.2 or 5.3, a fasting blood sugar of 89, and if you stress them, oh my gosh, their blood sugar shoots to 180. Their insulin levels are massively elevated, and they have insulin resistant out the wazoo, and nobody would know it, right? So it's really important that you're working with a clinician that's not just using sick care testing. This is what happens at executive physicals. They're using sick care testing to see if you're healthy or not, right? And then it's a wellness program. You want to be working with somebody that's actually looking behind the curtains, behind the curtains, behind the curtains to really figure what's going on, right? Because when you do that, now you're actually starting to get really actionable information. This is how you protect yourself, how you really optimize.
Listening to this, you're explaining, I think, a mystery that we've had between my co-founders. So one of my co-founders, Ash, has been throwing all kinds of biometrics into his Volcker data store so that we can do personal data science on each other, right? And he noticed that the slope of his glucose graph, measured with a continuous glucose monitor, was predictive of deep sleep later that night.
Okay, that's cool.
Which on its face makes no particular sense, but and in particular the faster slope, right? So it wasn't even max level; it was how fast it was reached, which seemed to be the predictor. But yeah, like what if that's just a secondary? The effect on his sleep is a secondary effect of something basically weird going on in insulin resistance.
Yeah, it's insulin resistance is also when you spike your sugar. There can be cortisol, there can be stress in the system.
Oh, I like that.
Things like that, right? Which can interrupt sleep. Growth hormone release is suppressed, so that decreases sleep quality.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. There's a clear D wave sleep to your growth hormone relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. So all these things, which is one of the reasons not to eat a big dinner. That's another reason not to eat sugar at night, right? If you're going to have a piece of pie, we'll have it at noon, right? But don't have it at dinner.
That's what my data has been telling me too. That's exactly right. Like if I have sweets, I basically do it before noon or not at all.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's rich eating, right?
Oh, that's so cool. See, yeah, like when you're only looking at your own data, you have no idea. Like it seems like unlocks like this happen when you compare your own quirky results to others and you go, oh, it's not just me.
That's right. No, that's right. Yeah, what you're really doing is you're starting to deconstruct the biology below, right?
Right.
The thing that CGMs don't do is they don't measure insulin levels. And so we see people who, when we do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test, they control the sugar beautifully, right? It starts off at 89, it went to 96, came back down to 84, 2 hours later. Beautiful, right? And yet, in the backdrop, their fasting insulin was 3, but it went up, shouldn't go up more than 5 times. It should maybe go to 15, but it went to 46, and 2 hours later, it's still at 32. You would never know they have insulin resistance unless you see what I'm saying? And the CGM is not showing it to you. So my point is you really have to work with people that are doing the right testing to look behind the curtain, or you're misled all the time. We see it all the time. People are misled all the time. Right.
Oh, wow. All right. So I think that you just blew my mind. I think you just blew a lot of listeners' minds with that.
Hopefully in a good way.
If you think you're living a well-instrumented life, but you're simply unaware of important factors like this, how do I get on the measurement train with you? How do listeners find you and learn more about your practice? And
Sure. Yeah, we're at GladdenLongevity.com. We have a podcast as well, the Gladden Longevity Podcast. Need to have you guys on there. Be a fun conversation. Yeah. And the book is out, 100 is the New 30. And if anybody wants to schedule a free discovery call, they can reach out through the website and have a call with us and see. We don't take insurance, right? So we don't want to wear those handcuffs. We do packages based on what people are looking for, right? Like fix my knee, fix my brain. I want to live to be 150. Whatever your questions you're asking, we can build out a program and a package for that, so to speak. But the discovery calls are free, and then we can kind of go from there.
Fantastic. All right. Dr. Gladden, thanks so much for sharing all of this knowledge with me. This was magnificent.
Oh, beautiful. I love chatting with you, Michael. Love the journey that you're on.
Thank you.